Hello. Today we introduce you to a professor of yoga and physical sciences at the Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anusadhana Samsthana. He is Dr. Alex Hankey. Let us welcome him to the show. Hello, sir.
Thank you so much. I'm trained as a theoretical physicist. My first degree was from Cambridge University, and then I did my PhD in the Center for Theoretical Physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I was very fortunate to be able to work with two very great scientists, Steven Weinberg, who is known as the author of the Standard Model, and a wonderful man called Gene Stanley, with whom I eventually wrote my PhD thesis. Now, my PhD thesis was written in a field of magnetic systems and magnetic instabilities, what's called critical phenomena. But it turns out that these critical phenomena are of central importance in complex biological systems, particularly nervous systems. And so I've been able to use my expertise in that field to understand advanced problems in theoretical biology, complexity biology, and medicine. That is the reason why, as a physicist, I have fundamental interest in areas of traditional knowledge and complementary medicine.
First and foremost, I would like to know how and when did you discover your interest in Ayurveda, being a theoretical physicist?
I started working with the Vedic sciences in 1972. In 1973, I joined the faculty of Maharishi International University after I had been at MIT and Stanford in the United States. I was asked by Maharishi, as part of the development of the college, to begin to work out relationships between the modern sciences and the Vedic sciences. But it wasn't until 1985, about 12 years later, that we had our first lectures on Ayurveda in the winter of 84-85. So this was January 85 in Holland, from the great Vaidya Padma Vibhushan Brihaspati Dev Triguna, who gave us our first lectures on Ayurveda. He was the physician to the president and also the chairman of the All India Congress on Ayurveda.
Being in India, like you have come to India a lot of times, right?
I came to India first in 1980-81, again in 1988, on both times to work on the Vedic sciences with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. But in 2006, I came back specifically for Ayurveda.
Okay. So what all positions have you held in India?
Oh, the positions I've held. I was a visiting scientist at the University of Pune with the Department of Interdisciplinary Health Sciences in early 1986. And my host invited me back when he moved to the University of Manipal to act, helping him advise the Central Board of Manipal Universal Learning, the governing board for Manipal University and its other 20 campuses and Manipal Sikkim University. Now, in 2009, my colleague from the University of Pune was given the directorship of the Institute of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine in Bangalore, and he asked me to join him there to help found the Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine. Between Manipal and IAIM, as we call it, the Institute for Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine, I had been working at Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anusandhana Samsthana, the Yoga University in Bangalore, and I had been developing an ability to direct students' work in PhD theses on yoga. So now I've moved back there and I'm professor of yoga and physical science at the Vivekananda Yoga University, as we call it. And I work closely with the university's founder, lastly its vice-chancellor and now its chancellor, Dr. Nagendra.
What is the role of yoga in Ayurvedic medicine?
Well, this is relevant, very relevant, because of course today we are starting the second Global Ayurveda Festival here in Kochi. And yoga has great relevance to Ayurveda. When we look at the ancient Upanishads, we see that they contain the first concepts which are widely used in Ayurvedic medicine. They use the concept of prana. And what they essentially say is that the quality of prana in the body determines the level of health. And the quality of prana in the body is determined by the quality of mind. And they name 5 pranas, which they name the Panchavayus: prana, udana, samana, vyana, and apana. They also name 5 upapranas, which are the minor pranas. But when a yogi can directly perceive and control his own pranas, he is also able to enliven the pranas appropriately in a balanced fashion in his shishyas. And this is the origin, in my estimate, of medicine and ultimately of Ayurvedic medicine. It was originally a system of spiritual healing, and it was originally a system of enlivening the life breath, the prana, in the shishya, so that the shishya could advance on the path to enlightenment. Now, when we see the basic fundamental of Ayurveda, it's contained in the motto, Ayurvedo Amritanam. Ayurveda is for immortality. It's to extend the lifespan. And this cannot be done without the addition of yoga to the Ayurveda programs. Okay. So, in a sense, yoga is an essential component of all truly traditionally practiced Ayurveda. And that's the way we look on it at Vyasa. We also use Ayurveda at Vyasa Yoga University, but we use it as a minor component and yoga as a major component. At the other institute where I worked, the Institute for Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine, they use Ayurveda as the major component and yoga as the secondary component.
According to you, what is the role of Ayurveda in the area of chronic disease?
This is very important because this is the reason that Ayurveda really stimulated my interest. When I first learned Nadi Vigyan from a wonderful doctor from Delhi called Dr. Raju in 1989, we learned the theory of how the doshas, Vata dosha, Pitta dosha, Kapha dosha, which we measure with the index finger, the middle finger, and the ring finger, we learned the theory of how these go out of balance. Now, Ayurveda names 4 stages of how the doshas go out of balance before you get the manifestation stage of illness, vyakta. So there are 4 stages that you can reverse and make a person healthy before they get diseased. In modern medicine, people fall ill, they go to the doctor, and it's almost too late to treat them. But Ayurveda forms the ideal basis for a system of preventive medicine in public health care. And we feel at the Yoga University that yoga and Ayurveda alone can solve the crisis caused by diabetes. And the diabetes crisis, which has been likened to a tsunami, will continue to engulf the nation and swallow it up until we introduce proper public health prevention programs using Ayurveda and yoga. And it was for this reason that I got really deeply interested in learning to understand what it means when we say the doshas go out of balance.
What do you mean by doshas going out of control?
Going out of balance, doshas are regulatory systems which control the overall functioning of the body. My own work has shown how doshas apply from single cells through the whole development of life, and how they now control different systems, different organ systems in human beings. Now, this is a very complex structure of regulation which has evolved over biological history and biological development. So what we see is that these three functions have to be maintained in balance, because otherwise this system may accumulate something which becomes a problem, because different parts of the system are not in balance. So you have to maintain a balance between different functions, different fundamental functions, and this is done by maintaining a balance between the regulation of those functions by the three doshas. Vata dosha, which concerns input-output from the system. Pitta dosha, which concerns functions like digestion on a macroscopic level, and metabolism on a cellular level, and which concerns throughput in the system. And kapha, which uses a lot of molecules like sugars and carbohydrates and lipids, which concerns the storage of system resources. These three functions, input-output, turnover or throughput, and storage, have to be maintained in balance. When doshas go out of balance, there's a fundamental disequilibrium found in the system. That eventually leads to disease.
It is said that there are 6 stages of doshas imbalance. What are they?
This is a very important concept which originates in the ancient Samhitas. The doshas going out of balance lead to disease, and they are driven out of balance by stress on the system, by people doing things which are inappropriate to the system. If you eat too much, you drive kapha out of balance. If you stay up too late at night and you watch horror movies and other things, you drive vata out of balance. Doshas go out of balance in stages, and as I explained, only after the 4th stage do you get manifest pathology. Now, the first 2 stages correspond to what we understand in modern medicine as the effects of stress. There's adaptation of the system to a stressful situation and maladaptation of the system, which is beginning to be harmful, maladaptation. The 5th and 6th stages are the manifestation of local pathology in a particular place, like, say, the liver, or it could be in the kidneys, or it could be often in the prostate in males. Now, if you let the manifest stage get too far gone, you get to a problem which will destroy the organ, prostate cancer, and that can prove fatal, and you get to the stage known as beta. So these are the first 2 stages which are understood from stress, and the last 2 stages which are well understood from modern pathophysiology, produced by Claude Bernard, the famous French physiologist, pathophysiologist in the 19th century. Now, Claude Bernard asked, what is the connection between the loss of equilibrium at the beginning, which he also described, and the manifestation of local problems, which is the beginning of serious pathophysiology? lies in between? Modern medicine has never fully and generally answered the question. We are beginning to understand it, but Ayurveda has known that answer for 2,500 years, almost 3,000 years since the time of Sushrut, who educated the physician to the Buddha. And at least 2,700 years ago, Ayurveda had the answer that there are two stages in between, where the general problem of the doshas causes a shifting of doshas from one area of the body to another, and then their localization. So the spreading of dosha problems could be a chemical problem, could be a biophysical problem, and then its localization in an organ where it manifests has been known to Ayurveda for getting on for 3,000 years. Now, if Claude Bernard had been told this, he would have been hugely interested. But it's because Ayurveda knows this, that it has the key to understanding things that modern medicine needs to know in order to cure the chronic disease crisis. Because chronic diseases don't seem to have a direct and immediate cause very often, like infectious diseases. And if you just try and treat symptoms, which is what modern medicine does, you very often cause further damage. But if you rebalance the system from the top, you balance the doshas, you balance the sub-doshas, you balance things in the organs, then you cure the pathology without recourse to things that cause harm. Now that is the complete answer, really, of why dosha imbalance is so important to understanding chronic disease and the different stages of how doshas go out of balance. It took me 20 years to work this out, but now I feel we understand it well enough to give this knowledge to the medical community so that they can make use of it too.
Point of view, what differences do you find in the diagnosis and treatment systems in Ayurveda and the modern medicine?
This is a beautiful question. You see, when you work with modern medicine, you're a specialist, and the specialist specializes in thinking of particular organs. So they diagnose the problem in the organ, and they are only beginning to think of the organs in relationship to the rest of the system. And even then, it's usually a particular part of the system. A person may have problems in the thyroid, so they think of the relationship between the thyroid, the pituitary, and the hypothalamus, which are a succession of governing bodies which tell the thyroid what to do. Okay? So if you get hypothyroidism, then people think of this part of the system, okay? But they don't think of the system as a whole. Now the Ayurvedic doctor thinks of the system as a whole, how a person's behavior affects their health, how a person's daily routine influences their health, how a person's diet and dietary habits affect their health. So the differences between a system of medicine which is very focused on local problems and knows all about them. Whereas the Ayurvedic system focuses on the whole organism and how a person's personal habits may be driving a particular organ out of balance. If a person overeats, okay, it turns out that there are now reasons for understanding that there is a connection between getting seriously overweight and getting an autoimmune problem in the thyroid. It's a hypothesis which is being investigated, but it's extremely relevant to understanding how this happens. Because a behavioral problem, I eat too much, too late in the day, will explain why someone has a thyroid problem, maybe. But in modern medicine, you say, you have an autoimmune problem, that is what we have to solve. But they don't see it in the wider behavioral context. Now, you can cure one disease of this kind, but if a person has a class of diseases due to kapha imbalances, because they're getting too many sugars and lipids into the system, then if you cure one kapha problem, they will get another kapha problem. But what my student in Bhopal has found is that if you focus on the kapha problem and you cure the kapha problem by rebalancing behavior and supplying one or two herbal juices as well, you cure the hypothyroid and you don't get the other kapha rogas. Kapha roga means a kapha imbalance stimulated disease. This is something that we found in the last 10 days when I was working with her at her Rasahar clinics in Bhopal. But this is a common element of Ayurveda. If you don't redress the imbalances, the chronic disease problems continue. You may not see the direct connection between a behavioral pattern and disease. You may not see the connection between developing vata imbalance by watching horror movies late at night and getting a migraine. But migraines are a vata vyadi. They're a disease, a vyadi, caused by a vata imbalance. Okay? Or they can be. Cure the vata imbalance, get the patient to go to bed early, not to watch the horror movies in the evening at another time of day. And then you find that you can cure the disease. But just giving painkillers, palliative treatment, will never get rid of the underlying problem. Now, in my work, I'm hoping that I shall be able to inspire the medical community to take a serious interest in doshas and dosha imbalances from my program of decoding Ayurveda and explaining them rigorously in scientific terms that don't lose the understanding of the original integrity of Ayurveda. Okay. That's why I think even biophysics can bring an illuminating light on the details of the fundamental concepts in Ayurveda, what the Vaidyas call Ayurveda Padartha.
Is there any way that modern medicine is beginning to approach Ayurveda?
In its understanding of regulation, there is a very important concept which is emerging from modern medicine. I talked about the relationship between the hypothyroid, the pituitary, and the thyroid gland. There is another axis, as it's known, the HPA axis, hypothyroid, pituitary, and adrenals. Now, this turns out to be a kapha axis. The hypothyroid, the pituitary, and the adrenals is a vata axis. and they all converge in the pituitary, or they both converge in the pituitary and the hypothalamus. Okay? Now, this means that you have different axes emerging from the central nervous system, which are in charge of detailed regulation of the body, which one can connect the adrenals to vata, the thyroid to regulating kapha problems also, and being connected to kapha imbalances. And so you see that there are different structures of regulation emerging from a central regulation point, which involves the mind and the emotions. Okay? Now, this concept of a regulatory hierarchy has become very popular as one aspect of complexity biology. Murray Gell-Mann, the famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and Jack Cowan, former director of Los Angeles laboratories, set up the Complexity Institute, the Santa Fe Institute, based on seeing this kind of hierarchy in many systems. This is where it connects intimately into medicine. Okay? Now, this idea of a hierarchy is now being emphasized very strongly by one of Great Britain's most famous, the United Kingdom's most famous physiologists, Professor Dennis Noble, former professor or Professor Emeritus of Physiology at Oxford University. And what Professor Noble is saying is that it's now time for the medical community to make full and proper use of this idea of a systematic hierarchy of regulation. Now, from our perspective, it tells us two very important things. If you can bring balance to the top of the hierarchy by bringing doshas into balance, you, in Ayurveda terms, you create balance all the way down the hierarchy. Then if you have a problem in the thyroid, it goes away. If you have problems in the adrenal glands, they go away. If you have problems in the pancreas, in the other organs, in the cells, they slowly get resolved by bringing the doshas at the top of the hierarchy, almost at the top of the hierarchy, into balance. But at the Yoga University, we understand that the mind is in charge of even the doshas. So if you can bring the mind into balance through yoga, then you can actually also balance the whole system. So at the Yoga University, we've been applying this particularly to improving the quality of life of cancer patients. We've been showing that it cures cardiovascular disease, particularly transcendental meditation propagated by His Holiness Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is the only system of complementary medicine now approved by the American Medical Association for hypertension, one of the chief components of heart disease. All these systems, the system of yoga medicine from Vyasa, acts at the very top of the hierarchy. Rebalance the mind, eliminate the psychosomatic causes of illness, get rid of the stress, bring the doshas back into balance, and the chronic diseases begin to disappear. This is a strategy that we now understand well enough for modern medicine to take a serious interest in it. It's very important that doctors begin to have these fundamental concepts firmly introduced into the curriculum at medical schools. When Ayurveda is acknowledged as being a useful modality, when yoga, which is increasingly accepted in India, is introduced as part of the curriculum at medical schools, we will really be able to solve the chronic disease crisis, which is manifesting in India through cardiovascular disease, through things like thyroidism, through diabetes, until we introduce these things early in life so that everyone can take advantage of them, we will continue to be swallowed up by these problems.
Ayurveda talks about the state of perfect health.
That is true.
So, is there any way to understand it for the modern science?
Yes, modern science is beginning to approach the understanding of complex systems and put it on a fundamental basis. You have to understand that this system is a complex system, which is to say that all its functions are connected. You cannot begin to understand and to manipulate the function of one organ in isolation in a biological organism, because all the functions have to be connected with each other. Now, it turns out that modern biology is understanding that the state of optimal regulation is actually located at an instability, which I mentioned to you in discussing what I had studied at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in my PhD. Now, once you understand that this criticality state is a state of optimal regulation, you can see that if the system could maintain criticality, as it's called, then it would produce a state of health. If you have poor regulation, you have poor health. Poor regulation means that you can't respond to an infection. You can't respond to a change of season. You are not adaptable. The change happens, you get ill instead of adapting. Dennis Noble discovered how the heart becomes functioning in a way that makes it adaptable to almost any change. Okay? Now, if this critical state could be spontaneously produced, then the system would maintain its own state of health spontaneously. One of the central concepts of complexity biology is a concept called self-organized criticality, which is due to a famous Danish physicist called Per Bach, who published his first work on it, not connected to biology, in 1987. But now, a quarter of a century later, we understand that this fundamental principle, self-organized criticality, is a property of all organisms. And it means that the organisms are able to self-organize a state of optimal regulation. Now, I like to say that optimal regulation is an essential component of optimal health. So this fundamental principle from complexity, self-organized criticality, guarantees that someone who doesn't misuse the system too much maintains good health. So the message from modern medicine is, don't misuse the system to such an extent that self-organized criticality cannot restore you to a state of perfect health. As I understand it, these are the mechanics by which Ayurveda can describe the state of perfect health that it calls SVYSA. SVYSA means stabilization in the self, SVYSA. It's a very perfect description of self-organized criticality. This is the deepest level of relationship that I personally discovered between all systems of complementary medicine. Naturopathic medicine uses it consistently in nature cure. This is an explanation for nature cure. Just resting the system restores health. Ayurveda uses it in trying to get doshas back spontaneously to a state of perfect balance. Yoga uses it in the approach to pure consciousness. If you sit in samadhi in pure consciousness, This is a supremely health-restoring state. Patients, or not patients, practitioners of transcendental meditation have less than 50% of the health insurance uptake of ordinary members of the public. They have 85% less heart disease. We could cure the outbreaks of cardiovascular disease, the disaster in India, just by introducing this well-proven system that the American Medical Association has approved into India. The president of Brazil has publicly announced he will introduce it into Brazilian schools. We only have to introduce yoga medicine, meditation, an awareness of Ayurveda into schools throughout India, and we will transform the health of the next generation. It's an extremely powerful system that we have in India. We want to bring it to the world. And for me as a physicist, it's an immense privilege to work with these yogis and Vaidyas and these people who've preserved the traditional knowledge and who are now trying to bring it to the benefit of their fellows in India and throughout the world. So for me, it's an immense pleasure to be here at the second Global Ayurveda Festival and to be able to contribute what little I can. It's a very enriching and a very humbling experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for spending your valuable time
No,
with us.
thank you for giving me the opportunity. I have a huge amount to thank you for.
Thank you.